Getting promoted to engineer manager feels like winning the lottery. You have a new title, more money, respect. But 6 months in the role and you feel you're only stuck in pointless meetings, zero time to code, and no clear path to impact.
You pretty much have even less control about your day-to-day work. As an IC, you do have huge amount of control, right?
And the worst of all, you start wondering if you're even good at this anymore.
The power you think the title brings with it, it's way less, right? It's really less than an IC, which sometimes feels paradox.
I wanted to figure out what actually makes a great engineer leader. So I sat down with Ferit Topcu, a seasoned engineer manager with serious experience. He's led tech initiatives at Zalando, Redcare Pharmacy, and now at Zenjob.
The higher the level, the more people will listen to your words. And the more likely is it that the moment you are maybe not clear on what you're saying, what your message is, it will spread the whole company. And then if you get unlucky, everyone understands your message different, right?
By the end of this episode, you will learn what engineers often get wrong when stepping into tech lead roles, the real skills that drive impact. And they are not just technical. How to scale teams without burning them out, and how to connect architecture decisions to metrics that really matter. Whether you're about to take the first step into leadership or you've just been stuck in the role wondering what you're missing, this conversation might just change the way how you see the job. Welcome to the Tech Lead Experience. Let's dive in. I never knew a promotion could be so painful. What sticks with you about that quote?
I would say it starts with the pain and it also ends there, right? It's like, so when I started my first role, obviously, what I did is I jumped into like cold waters. I was a senior IC and then I moved to management where Redcare Pharmacy already knew like, hey, we had the conversations in hiring processes and then like, we know you're still junior, but we see potential. Let's try it out. And while I was learning and trying out a lot of things, I also realized how hard it is from scheduling, trying to get even things done when your whole day is full of meetings and you kind of feel like after 6 hours or 5-6 hours, like I'm done with it. I don't have, my brain is like in a fog mental state.
Yeah.
I think managers have that, but at one point that last meeting messes up sometimes with your brain functioning pretty well at this point. And then this was when I was reading this quote. I was trying to get into like, okay, what is this management thing about? What does it mean? Not only from an engineering point, because this quote is from like a Harvard Business Review, general tips for managers. And this was like, when I was reading it, I was like, yes, this is it. This really sticks with me. Like this was a promotion, is a promotion, but it's really different than moving from junior engineering to like mid-level or senior IC. Or even from senior to staff.
Yeah. I mean, there's like very clear when you're an IC, very clear what your contribution is. I think it's mostly based on outcome. And when you're starting to lead a team or to jump into management, you actually feel like, yeah, you're stuck into meetings and you don't perceive that as an outcome. So you're like, I'm only sitting in meetings all week and I don't see any outcome from my side.
This is exactly how it feels, right? I mean, especially when you are new to it, right? You're also often in meetings where you're not the driving seat. You're not in the meeting. You didn't ask for the meeting. So one of the learnings I had back then is like, I was thinking when I move into management, now I have time, right? I'm the manager. Now I can schedule the things I want them to be, only to learn this might work with your own things and with your team's schedules. But I totally missed the point of you will have huge amount of stakeholders, other managers, who have an interest to talk to you about different topics, and they will just drop in calendar invites. They will just try to sneak in a slot somewhere. They will not think about like, he already has 4 meetings. Maybe this meeting today makes no sense, right? They're just seeing, oh, in this week he only has 2 slots. I will pick this one. I don't know what happens before or after, but I need that slot because I want to have a conversation. And
yeah, exactly.
At the beginning hard.
Yeah, I saw you had a free slot here, so I'm going to book a meeting. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think most software engineers misunderstand about being promoted to a manager or a tech lead?
The most misunderstood thing, I mean, I also said this in my talk, right? I think there are many different dimensions to this, but I think the first and most important thing is what I said was you pretty much have even less control about your day-to-day work. As an IC, you do have huge amount of control, right? Yes, you have your standard. And I know from IC, right, when I was myself, right, oh, we have so many meetings. There is always something every day. And I want to have meeting-free Fridays or meeting-free Wednesdays, right? Which we also establish in different setups. But the reality is, as a manager, you can push for it, but this only works if the whole company organization follows that path. The moment only the engineering department does it, but your stakeholders are not always from engineering coming, right? They come from marketing, sales, other parts. They don't know that you have a meeting free Friday, right? So they will just put it there because this is the natural following order for them. Sometimes you try to tell them, hey, can we please schedule somewhere else, right? But then comes the second thing, yeah, but this is urgent, right? And then at that moment, you have way less control. This is what I think. Even when I was starting it, I was thinking I have more control, but you don't. The power you think the title brings with it, it's way less, right? It's really less than an IC, which sometimes feels paradox or contrary, but this is how I experience management at that point.
I see. I want to talk about, because it feels like, okay, the management is just about being in meetings. Of course, it's not just about that. And I'm going to dive into it so you can describe more how is a day to day. But I'm curious to know, because you started as a full stack developer, right?
Yeah, and full stack front end.
Yeah, and you were working at big companies as Zalando. I see that you became there a senior software engineer, and then you jumped from there to your first management role in the next company. Or was it in Zalando where you started to step in as a manager? And I would like to know a little bit, what was your breakthrough moment?
Yeah, so I did something, I would say more like the harder path to management. I was really a senior IC still at Zalando. This was also, there are different reasons why I wanted to have a switch. On the one hand, I was already thinking about trying out management for like half a year with my previous manager back then. And multiple things kicked in. One is I had personally a little bit of frustration, or like, let's say not frustration only, but also a bit like, okay, the job can be a bit repetitive, right? Even a full stack front end. Like at one point you're like, okay, this is yet another API endpoint I need to develop. This is yet another button I need to fix somewhere, right? At one point it feels repetitive. And then I was starting to think, okay, how does the work look like beyond coding? What is it? How does staff engineering, or back then it was at Zalando, they call it principal. How does that role look like, right? And I was reading about it. At the same time, I was looking into the managerial path, and I was thinking, okay, what should I do? So it was really like a long period of like, do I want to do management or not? And then I got this one advice in a Discord channel, because this was exactly when we had COVID, right? People missed this, but it was 2021, 2022, the COVID and lockdowns. Everyone was full remote. And I was on a Discord channel talking with basically strangers about these topics and others. And that was one really interesting advice someone gave to me. And this person told me the advice her manager gave her about trying out management. And she was like, the timing to try out management is now, like today.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, I was like, what do you mean? Like, she was like, yeah, imagine this. You go into management, you try it out 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, right? And you don't like it. Then you are maybe in your 40s or you're 35 or whenever your age is, right? And she was making the case, ageism is a thing, right? You don't want to be 50 plus year old manager who doesn't like management. And now at this point, it's super hard to get back maybe to IC, because the reality is different, right? We are not always so open to everything. And at the same time, this got me thinking, right? It was like, okay, wait a second. This is an interesting perspective, right? What do I fear? Okay, I fear that at one point I'm out of coding, which in reality is not the case, right? You're still with technical topics going around. Maybe you're not coding every day, but tech is everywhere. And this got me really thinking. And this was this self-reflective phase I had, plus some frustration about org changes. And at that point, I was also actively looking out. And then I just thought, let's just apply. I was looking internally, but this is one of the other learnings I had is the bigger the organization, the longer it takes sometimes to move into management, right? Because obviously a big company has a career path and they're like, yeah, we want to really make sure that you are a good manager, which is totally makes sense, right? But for me, it meant like, oh, I have another 1.5, 2 years to follow before I could even be in management, because the decision was like, you need to step the different career path, and this takes another year or two. And then I was like, okay, I was looking internally, and at that time, there was not really a position I could join, like do. So I was applying externally. And this is when Redcare Pharmacy made this unexpected move of saying, okay, you know what? We know you're junior. We know you never had people managerial skills, but we went through case studies with you. We had conversations and we feel really positive. Let's try it out. Because back then they also started establishing engineering leaders And they said the whole group is really new, which means you would still fit. And there was a lot of training going on in the future. It was a good moment. Pretty much the timing was perfect to join as an engineering manager, even when I'm new.
Yeah, it's a hard move because normally when you apply to an engineer management role, they ask already for 3 or 4 years of people management experience. But when you're a senior and you want to try or to do that leap in your career, it is hard because the only way is that if you got that position or in your current job and then you can apply to the next one just from, there's not such a thing as, or I haven't seen a junior engineering manager or junior tech lead.
No.
It doesn't exist.
No.
Somehow you need to prove yourself that you can do the job, but you don't have the experience.
Exactly.
If you're enjoying the podcast, make sure to subscribe. That way, we can keep bringing you real conversations with tech leaders and uncover what leadership in tech actually looks like. Just hit that button, subscribe, and leave a comment or like the video. It helps us bring you more real talk with tech leaders and share what leadership is really about. You're now working at Zenjob. It's a big platform for connecting part-time workers to the industry. Is that right, if I got it correctly?
Yes, only specific cases, really, you have to be student, right? Part-time student workers. It's a really specific legal thing.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't go into detail, but it's pretty much, it's like part-time or like flexible jobs, especially for students. You have to be a student, otherwise you can't apply for the job.
I would like to know what a typical day looks like for you as an engineer manager besides meetings.
That's true. I personally arrived quite early. To give my own personal perspective, at Zenjob, we have the policy of hybrid work, which means 3 days per week, you're expected to be in the office. And so this means I am here in the office way more often than in my previous role, which was mainly remote with sometimes being in the office. And I agree, the office is really nice. And I have to say, if you want to move back as a company, move into hybrid or into majority of people going back to the office, I think having a nice office experience is really important because this is exactly what I experience here. So I generally start my day getting my kids to school, right? And then being early in the office and before 9 a.m. So I do basically a small morning ritual, right, for myself. And then between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m., I am looking already into Slack, checking what's coming up the day, right? And I also know that at 10:30, we have our stand-up with the team, which means I'm already looking at, is there any information I should already give for the stand-up so people can plan or prioritize, right? So early in the morning, there is no meeting. It's just me for an hour going through basically the backlog, looking around what was happening in Slack. Was there maybe an incident, or let's say an incident happens? Do we need to follow up on certain things? Like a lot of different things, right? Which means I try to plan early in the morning my day, right? Looking what's ahead. Like even today, right, with the podcast, I also have like a 30-minute blocker to have my bullet points a little bit. Like, what do I want to say, depending on the questions? And then we have a stand-up. Then, depending on the state, often 1 or 2 project check-ins. So every company does this different, right? I'm the engineering manager of the mobile platform team, mobile and marketing tech. And I don't have like a dedicated product manager. It's more like a shared product role, which means I am more responsible for being engineering manager on the technical side, but also being a bit more on the product driven end. And this is also why I have more view into the backlog, talk to people about priorities, and try to have like a weekly or monthly setup. Like, okay, this is our priority for this week, especially. And then we have 1 or 2 project check-ins, which means for each of these projects, there's like half an hour check-in to look around, like to look on the backlog, what's going on. Do we hit certain milestones? Then a typical week besides that, right? Like project check-ins, preparing stuff is I normally have 1 or 2 one-on-ones, right? Depending on that one-on-one, it's good to also have 15, 20 minutes to just prepare them. And besides that, I would say it's some focus time, which then means, okay, what is that focus time? It depends. If, for example, there is currently a really tough deadline approaching, right? Then I would use my focus time to really go into the backlog again and see if we are missing some things. Check in with the engineers and see do we have some topics where they see we will not finish it in the next 3 or 4 days, right? Something unexpected. So just double check on this. Or in Zenjob, there is also space and incentive that the engineering manager is also able to code, right? Which means I also go into pull requests, do pull request reviews. I'm trying to do as much as possible, right? Because I'm still new, right? In a typical manner, I would say every day doing at least one pull request review is really nice. It just helps to stay fit.
There's normally in the engineer management or multiple leading positions in engineering, a lot of very specific technical requirements. And sometimes I actually wonder how important is to have them all, or is just enough to have fully knowledge of one of those specific, because as an engineer manager, you're actually not the one writing all of the code, but you should be able to understand why some solutions are being presented by the engineers. How deeply do you need to know all of those requirements?
That's a really good question. I would say, I think there's a reason why you are not directly an engineering manager after 1 year of coding. There is let's say 5 or 10 years. We all need to get our hands dirty and have a couple of incidents and let's say, issues experience. And this is really important, I think. To that question, I would say it depends a bit also on the company setup. For example, at Redcare Pharmacy, each team had a product manager, and then almost each team, or let's say we were like verticals or like smaller units. And in the units, we would always try to have 2 to 3 staff engineers, really making sure that technical decisions and let's say the best practices are followed, right? Which means like if the company already has a certain level of seniority in technical topics, then I think as an engineering manager, knowing enough, like maybe not 100%, but if you know like 70%, 70 to 80%, right, is already enough. Because oftentimes they would have a conversation about the topic, and then you should at least be able to follow that conversation. And oftentimes it's enough that you still know things. And even if you don't know, I think it's totally fine to ask a question. Because sometimes also as engineers, right, there is a tendency to overcomplicate a really simple thing with terms and sound maybe smarter, not willingly, right? Unwillingly, we engineers tend to have like our own language. And then we start talking about these really complicated topics. But at the end, it's maybe just a really simple thing. And then asking a question like, can you explain me again what this exactly is doing? What is it happening, right? Because often what I do and what I see with many other managers is like, we want to also try to map this thing into our existing knowledge and mental models we have, right? Are we talking about the backend, about APIs, right? What's the complexity here? Is it an event-driven architecture, right? There are certain architectural patterns we all go through, but at that point, it's kind of repetitive, except now with AI. I think this is now a completely different topic sometimes. But to answer your question, if the organization doesn't have a really senior engineering culture, right? Like really heavy in tech culture, then I would say the engineering manager should be more involved which then maybe is more on the tech lead side, right? The engineering manager is often more on the people and process and project side. And the tech lead is then maybe the role for that company because they are lacking this high performing or this intense understanding of engineering, right? Maybe, I think, what was it? Gagali Orosh and the pragmatic engineer. Now I'm quoting him. He made this case of like, there are 4 different types of companies, right? This kind of like more old fashioned. And then he had this case of saying like, there are 2 different mental models or types how engineering is seen. There is a tech company who sees engineers as like adding value, right? Because we are developing new features, which means with engineers, they are not on the cost center, but more on the profit center. And then there is this other part of engineering where, yes, you do your thing, but the upper management, let's say, or the whole company is so big that you're pretty much seen just as a cost center, right? So if something happens, companies also find to lay off on all angles, right? And they see you more on the costs, which can have different challenges and problems, right? And I think this is the case, right? If you're a cost center, this is also another perspective, then the engineering manager will be more on the projects management side, right? If you're in the engineering culture, they have a tendency to be more on the technical side strongly too. It's really tricky.
Basically, if the company is like product driven or if it's sales driven. When it's sales driven, you can have the platform with one engineer maintaining it as long as your sales team and marketing team is like all in the battle. But when you have a product, like for example, I don't know, just to mention it, like Miro. Everyone uses Miro. Miro is a very product-led company. It's a product. So if the product is shit, nobody buys it. Even if you put marketing out there, that is like
you will have huge churn, right? Maybe you can trick people for
Yeah.
using a 1-year license, but they will heavily remove that tool and will never look back. Even if you improve it, right? It's like, if my role would be, like I said, let's say this, or any company would have like really bad product experience, 2 years later, no one will try it out again, because at that point, you lost already the trust.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
true. Yeah.
I saw that you have moved into micro front-end architecture in the past.
Yep.
When you do those kind of decisions, for example, that's a very, let's say, quote unquote, expensive project, expensive engineering decision. Which parameters do you take when you are about to take a decision like that and to transition the whole architecture of the application of the company into that kind of architecture?
I mean, I learned this also recently. There is a name for this, the ASAP or ALAP. Like in this case, the moving to Microfrontends is a multi-year, huge migration project, especially for big companies, which means you want to make this decision as late as possible, ideally, right? Because once you make the decision, it might be really hard to go back.
Yeah.
In the Next.js Microfrontend case, and this is, I think, good about engineering. The first thing which some staff engineers already did. So I just joined 2022 at the beginning. Company had already some issues with the existing front-end server-side rendering engine for the shop they built up. And then there were already some staff engineers creating a proof of concept and trying out certain things. In a technical dimension, I think it's important. So the first thing for me is, what technical problem are we solving, right? Like, there are different dimensions. One is there a technical reason why we are solving it, right? Maybe, I don't know, it's really buggy. We can't maintain it, right? There are some technical metrics, right? Which often, from my perspective, are, how would I say it? There are just indicators that on the business end, likely something is also an issue. In our case, the biggest pain point was people started to fear contributing to that tech stack, to the older one, because they were like, okay, I can't guarantee that my new feature works because the test setup was not properly done. And there is so much complexity in the tech stack, right? That people were like really careful when they contributed a feature. Then they would also have like 1 or 2 weeks just testing phase to really test around and make a lot of things clear. With this setup, one of the goals we had was really like, okay, how can we make the organization faster, right? Getting to the metrics part. I think understanding what's the core problem, right? So what's your problem? What do you want to solve? There are different dimensions. One, it could be just technical engineering, right? You're on a really old, outdated infrastructure tech stack. And likely, again, for any technical metric, there is often a business or organizational equivalent, right? Like a metric which kind of connects the dots, right? From an engineering perspective, it could be the time we get a pull request live takes 1 week, right? Obviously, this connects to, hey, feature development takes 3 weeks, right? Because this is one part of feature development. So I think this is important. Once you have a technical metric, connect that to a business metric or like product metric, which then gives you also more leverage, right? Because then when you go out and say, hey, we need to do this, then the conversations should not be, yeah, our pull request review is slow, because you will likely talk to non-technical people often, right? And even if the executive director was once an engineer, their language of choice is business now, right? A senior manager on tech side is still a business manager at that point. So you need to understand their language, and you need to understand how you can even get that kind of nudge to their for your project, right? So they are convinced of it. And ideally, you have a couple of business metrics, right? And the best case, I think, is like, how can we make us faster, or how can we reduce incidents, right? There are many, many issues happening to that. So there should be definitely something connected on the business end. So having 1 or 2 core business metrics and technical ones, right? So because I think we should make both sides happy, the business, but also the engineering. To be specific, in our end, one was feature development. So we wanted to really have clear measures that teams creating a new feature will be faster on that end. How we did this? We had 2-3 small features where the teams were willing to try them on both ends. So they developed this on the old tech stack, and they also tried out the new one based on Next.js with a microfrontend approach. And then we already had like early data saying, like, oh, this took them 4 hours. Well, this took them 2 days, right? And you can already say, oh, this makes people likely 3x faster, especially when it's a new feature, right? Like, you always have to provide your trade-offs and boundaries. And this way, with proof of concept and really iterative approach, we really started with small tests, small iterative things to also show people data and show the business, hey, this really helps you out. And then at one point, we made a bet and said we want to migrate the product detail page, because it's the most complex part of an e-commerce product. And if you can get this right and show the company that the business metrics will also be better, then, at that point, it's like, okay, this is now a free ticket. You can go on and move it. And this is how it happened. It was a bit brutal, but at that point, the success came in because we migrated the PDP and a lot of different metrics improved. The SEO score improved heavily, the performance.
Yeah, you stated that the conversion rate increased on a 2% more of what you had before and a 10% on mobile.
Yeah, mobile was interesting in this case because the old tech stack was had issues with responsive design. I don't remember fully now because it was like 2 or 3 years ago. I believe it was because we were rendering back then the mobile page completely new, right? There was no proper caching on the mobile and web part of it, right? So there were like kind of 2 subpaths. So there would be a desktop-based rendering, and then there would be mobile. Back in the days when this was developed, which was already 10 years ago, the majority of customers and the majority of, let's say, the big baskets were driven by desktop. But over these 5 years of using it, that shift happened to like, most customers, elderly or not, are moving to mobile. So in this case, our mobile performance was really low and the conversion rate. I think focusing on that helped a lot.
Yeah. And also, there, while you were at Red Pharmacy, also you doubled the team while keeping a low turnover. How do you scale the team without losing people or momentum?
So this was back then also an interesting challenge for me, which I think it's not like common. It happened because there was some economical uncertainty. Well, I think it was a couple of months into the Ukraine war, and also things were not clear, especially in Germany, energy costs and everything. People were a bit more careful. What should I buy or not? And also from an economical point, company decided like, okay, we want to be a bit more conservative and really careful in our spending. And this also meant in this case, letting go some externals. And at the same time, made a plan of still we need some people because we have a huge roadmap and legal requirement to do certain things. So through some reorganization, I ended up with the task of like, okay, you have 2 teams, but now you need 4. The end goal is you want to have 4 people because the topics you have are these. This is the domains and you need them. How we hired them, my strategy for this was really, we had different things. So one approach I did is there was one team which already existed. And we already started hiring 1 new engineer, right? So there were like 5 people. And this is when I was having conversations and then we had the idea of like, okay, the topics this team have needs to be split anyway in the future. So then we made the case of like, okay, this team who already exists already knows everything. They already have a culture, right? They already perform really well. We will hire all the additional people into that team, accepting that it will slow them down, right? Which means any new hire will get a mentor from existing team. So this way, ideally, they will be faster, productive. And at the same time, we will know way faster if it doesn't work from a culture fit perspective, right? So the good thing about that is it was basically growing one team into 2, right? And then at that point, making a split, which I think from a technical point, is easier, right? Because you have existing engineers. They know how things work. So the new joiners, which also happened over like 6 or 7 months, right? You don't hire 4 people at the same time. It's basically every 2-3 months, one person joins. They get a buddy. That buddy makes sure that they get everything set up, learn the architecture, the best practices, the guidelines. And then what we also did is like these people then started to be the buddy of the other new hire. Right? So also having like hey, I'm also a new joiner. Now you can easily bond because I'm just here for 1 or 2 months. So you joined, let's together figure things out. So creating this kind of like a buddy system where everyone tries to help each other, this definitely helps scaling, especially scaling without me, because this was like, okay, I have people, I trust them from a cultural point. They know exactly what is important for me and for the company. And from that perspective, and also openly communicated with them, right? So transparent communication, like making clear, like what's my expectation to them, right? Oh, you're a buddy. But after 3 months, I will especially look also to you and you give me about this person's performance, about especially the culture part. Do they add value to the team? What is the value they are adding from your perspective? And this was really important, like making me not a blocker for scaling, because otherwise I could do everything on my own. But from 9 people to 18 people, I was already clear like this will not work out because just interviewing will be so hard.
Yeah.
That I was focusing mainly on interviewing on one part, right? And we even flipped that. So for example, while I was interviewing, at one point the recruiting the recruiter told me like, hey, it's really hard to find a slot in your calendar. What do you think? How can we unblock you? Right. And then I was realizing, okay, maybe I can do my interview a bit later, because we realized for certain positions, for senior engineers, our staff engineers were doing the interviews and they had really high expectation. So it meant like, even if I would say yes culturally, they would give off a no technically.
Yeah,
so then
yeah.
we swapped this, right? We changed. We said, okay, you know what? This is for me way more important. If this engineers say no on a technical end, because it's an IC role, it makes no sense that I invest my energy already. And then later we realize, so we swapped, for example, the recruiting process. So it
Makes
was a
sense.
lot of being flexible, being agile, right? And this is how I basically scaled it, right?
That actually is one of the key roles of a manager, to be an enabler.
Yes.
Yeah, like to enabling your staff engineers being able to have a say in the hiring process, for example. And now you are also part of the LeadDev meetups. You're leading here one of the chapters here in the community building. Why did you want it to be part of it, and what has it taught you about leadership inside the companies?
So why I want to be part of it? To be honest, it all started basically with doing the conference. So being at the conference, being a speaker at the LeadDev in 2023. It was a 10-minute talk. And this whole experience, which the credit goes to LeadDev, I have to say, like, once you're a speaker at the LeadDev conference, the way they are preparing you for your talk, the way they are treating you, the way everything is also organized, right? Is like, it was really an amazing experience, right? Especially I think his name was Rob. He was really making sure that my content, my slides were working well. My first iteration, I was not really happy with it. And then he was also like directly telling me like, you have too much slides. You need to get this down. You only have 10 minutes. You really need to make this 5 slides max. You have to go back on the drawing board. I can help you, but honestly, everything is there, but you really need to get it down to like core messages. And this was like 4 weeks or 5 weeks before the conference, right? And I was like, oh, no, this will not going to work out, right? But he helped me and he supported me. And this pretty much made me like the conference itself, right? And yes, when you're a speaker, you get like a following year, you also get the ticket. And then I was going in there again, let's say like cold emailing them. And I was like, hey, I had a really amazing experience. I am in the conference anyway next year. Is there anything I can just contribute? Because, I have the ticket. I will be there. Maybe they need some help and support, right? Maybe I can be just a little bit part of making this conference for other people a bit better. And this is how it ended up, right? I was there. I cold emailed Rob. And he was like, hey, this 100%, we always need people. And then this is when I did like a small panel conversation. I was also, I don't know what they call this, like a buddy for first-time joiners. So they have all these different concepts of like, oh, someone is joining the first time, or they have like a scholarship ticket and they would like to connect this with like a person who already knows the conference. So this is also how I met new people. And then one way or the other, they approached me, I think, and said, hey, are you interested in running the meetup next year? Would you like to do this? And I was like, yeah, why not? I never did a meetup. And this is how I started in it.
That's great. Yeah. Actually, I was checking the next dates and I'm like, okay, maybe if I see another September. One, I will for surely join.
So maybe already spoiling me. It's September at one point is the next one.
Yeah. For engineers aiming to become tech leads or even a CTO one day, what is the most underrated skills that they should start developing today?
I would say 2 things. One, communication. I know everyone says it, but it's really important. And maybe not even communication, but more your presentation and negotiation skills. So I would go a bit deeper. Not negotiating in a sense like you want to make a deal, but I think it's really important to understand whenever you're in a meeting, who are the other people in the meeting, what is it that they want to get out of this meeting, right? Understanding different people's motivations and also trying to understand how can I influence these people, right? Influencing others, nudging. This is, I think, how's the term called? This is a skill set often as ICs you don't see, right? Often you're like, it's just me. I want to make my tickets done. I want to get this feeling of I achieved something. But as a manager, and I don't know, but I believe as a CTO even more, right? The higher the level, the more people will listen to your words, right? And the more likely is it that the moment you are maybe not clear on what you're saying, what your message is, it will spread the whole company. And then if you get unlucky, everyone understands your message different, right? People will say, oh, this is how I understood our CTO. He said we should focus on infrastructure because he said we need to do this, right? And then the others will say, wait a second, I understood him differently, right? And then you realize you created conflict as a manager, but you never intended to create a conflict, right? So communication or like negotiation, I think this is all together. This is really important. And the second part I would say is like change management. This is what I'm still learning. When you're in a managerial position, you are way more often asking people to support changes or maybe even forcing changes they didn't ask for. So this means being a good change manager or change agent. In this case, this is a skill set, maybe a bit hard as an IC to learn, but definitely a skill set maybe from a perspective of if I'm an IC, understanding that, okay, a change is happening. Why is this happening, right? Understanding the big picture of like, why is this C-level person or manager now making a call of changing a reorg or deprioritizing certain things, right? Because as an IC, you might have like a really narrow view and you're like, I don't get it. I worked a month on this project. Now everything is for nothing, right? This kind of feeling comes up. But the reality is maybe there is a bigger story behind this change you didn't get now because you're emotional about your own tasks, right? Being a bit less emotional and trying to really understand the bigger picture. And in best case, just asking a manager, why do we do that change?
Yeah. What's the one thing you believe about engineering leadership that most people would disagree with?
It's not, people would disagree. This is a good point. We're still, 3 years in, did I make my decision up on this? Maybe a little bit controversial, right? Depending on how you're as a manager coming in. I still believe being transparent, maybe even being radically transparent, don't hiding too many messages, right? Rather be more on the oversharing than not sharing at all. Might be something controversial because from my experience, I also met people who really like to not share many stuff, right? They wait until the last moment and then they just share, right? One day before the big change is happening. And then they're surprised that people are confused, right? Coming back to the change agent, I feel being more transparent also within bad news is maybe something not everyone in engine management will agree with, right? Or the other thing is these days, I would say tech stacks doesn't matter that much anymore, right? Your programming language is getting less interesting, except you're in a niche, right? For general product development, I think, I don't know if it's a hot take. I feel like this is slowly getting common sense that if you're in Python or TypeScript or Java or Kotlin, right, you have to be flexible maybe as an engineer to switch certain languages and not focus on that anymore. As in the past, right? 10 years ago, people would get expertise in a language because being a language expert was the thing, right? But now these days, I feel like it's less important.
And with now that AI is getting better at doing the IC's job, do you think that is a better opportunity for individual contributors to take a more leadership role within their task, or do you think that managers should become more hands-on with the leverage of AI? Where do you think it will move? Or like developers being like full stack, meaning they lead and develop, or leaders that need to become more individual contributors?
The truth is, I think no one knows the answer. And there are different forces. How I see it is like there are many different pushes to that, right? I do see that coming from an IC role, that certain roles disappear, or let's say engineering is becoming, like developing, even if it's vibe coding, right? I saw recently one of our product managers at Zenjob who was just vibe coding with the visual tool and creating a proof of concept. Or like, hey, this is how I see this product, right? And I was like surprised, like, wait a second, how did you do this? And he was like, I just screenshotted some stuff from the Figma design from the designer, and then I just played around, have this tool, and then it gave me something which is okayish to show people, right? Like a click dummy, but the real one, which was already with programming code, right? So this is when I would say even product managers being a bit more engineering, right, is already there. This is why I think engineering managers being a bit more hands-on is definitely a short-term thing which is happening, right? And I see moving a bit more into product managerial role and accountability. I don't know. I think everyone should do it, right? I think we should all explore it because this is the only way to know for sure what's happening. I'm also starting to do a bit more coding in my current position, just because when I have a bit more space and time and with the current AI editors, right, whether it's Cursor or VS Code or plugin, it is really good when you're a senior person, right? I coded for more than 10 years, which means if I have like an AI, I can really guide it and I can really get quickly onboarded to a new code base. So this, for example, is something which I see like getting onboarded to a code base is way faster now because you can literally just chat with an AI and it helps you. And this is when I would say engineers should really look into maybe going into leadership, but more on the product leadership side, because one catch exists. We don't know how many managers we will need in the classical sense, right?
Yeah.
There is a theory that empathetical leadership needs to exist. Human-human interactions will exist, right? But we also don't know how big the teams will be, right? There was the last years, there was a push of one manager has more than 10 people because it's more normal, right? You can do many more things with AI, you're more productive. And I don't know, maybe also the career paths will change, right? Maybe we don't have all huge amount of different frameworks. Maybe we just have one or two, which are way more fluent, right? Maybe you're moving way faster into a product engineering role, whatever that means. And then you're moving back to a design engineer or then to an engineering leadership, right? Maybe role fluency is a new thing, right?
Yeah. I'm role fluid in that sense.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, role fluent, this is maybe a thing.
As a manager, you have more time with AI. As a engineer, you can do some of the stuff that managers does, or that product does, or the design does. So maybe full stack will mean something else in the future. Ferit Topcu, it was a pleasure having this conversation with you. I hope this helps a lot of the people. Thanks a lot, and have a nice day.
You too. Thanks a lot for inviting me again.
My pleasure.
If you enjoyed this conversation and gave you something to think about, hit subscribe, drop a like, or leave a comment. It helps a lot, and it lets us keep bringing you real stories from the world of tech leadership. See you in the next episode.